Hi, we are the Systems Change Alliance, and we believe that the world is in need of major change at a systemic level. Change is already happening, and in this series of interviews, we talk to people around the world who are leading that change and living the alternatives to the mainstream ways of doing things. Today, we welcome Cynthia Tina. Hi.
Hello, Alexander. Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. So, Cynthia, you're an expert in the field of intentional communities, yes?
Yes.
You wouldn't call yourself an expert?
Yes, I suppose I would.
And you have a network of different sustainability and community projects that you've visited worldwide, and
Yes.
you connect people from communities. How does that work? Tell me about
Well,
this
I
process.
connect people to communities,
Right.
as well as the communities themselves,
Mm-hmm.
largely through my work as co-director of the Foundation for Intentional Community. So
Okay.
this is a 35-year-old nonprofit organization that has a network of 1,500 communities around the world. And we do
Wow.
lots of educational things and have a directory. And then myself personally, I'm a coach for community seekers.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
people who want to join eco-villages or co-housing, co-living,
Mm-hmm.
permaculture
Mm-hmm.
communities. I help connect them in that way.
How did you get in? How did you get involved in this?
Oh, well, I've been very fortunate to have gotten to travel
Mm-hmm.
to places around the world that are trying to do life differently.
Mm-hmm.
I did not grow up in an intentional community at all. I actually grew up just north of Boston, normal suburban family, went to private Catholic school growing up. But I was always very interested in people who were experimenting with different ways of living, places that were doing innovative agriculture or architecture things. And I read about these projects. And then when I got a little older, started to travel to visit them.
Mm-hmm.
And now visited over 100 of such places around the world. And I think through those experiences, I found myself in different leadership positions with organizations that are really trying to uplift this movement and grow it.
So you just kind of found yourself in it by happening to travel with through different places and experience it in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times in life we go where we feel called, where we're
Mm-hmm.
attracted, and we just follow that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know for myself, because I grew up with a lot of privilege, I felt a great weight of responsibility on my shoulders, a strong desire to give back
Mm-hmm.
and to do my part to be part of the shift towards something more sustainable and regenerative.
Okay. And do you feel like this is working, that you're creating that kind of shift in some way?
I do think it's working.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah.
So so tell me about intentional communities and your experience of them.
Sure. Where to start? Um, well, I think when people hear this word intentional community, there's some maybe stereotypes that come to mind, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, a hippie commune off in the woods somewhere. But actually, intentional communities come in a wide variety of formats, some of which are quite mainstream and urban. So there's really a diversity of ways that people are thinking about living together.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it's a very old way of living. I mean, we evolved as humans to live in groups,
Mm-hmm.
in tribes, in packs, and it's really with our more modern way of living where we're separated into nuclear families and we, have these communities that have grown up with the automobile, so they're not on a human scale, they're more spread out, and we don't have as many opportunities to connect with each other in authentic ways. We connect on our little cell phone devices, but that's not the same as a real human connection, sharing resources. And especially right now, in a moment of this COVID-19 pandemic, even more so than before, the epidemic of loneliness has been exacerbated. And people are really, really feeling lonely. And so intentional communities offer just one of a variety of ways that people can find more connection, meaning, belonging in their life by joining an intentional community. So you have eco-villages, which are maybe a little bit more alternative, more fringe. I actually live at an eco-village in Vermont. Co-housing communities, which tend to be more, a little bit closer to a typical development model, and I find a little more accessible to the average person. And then a variety of co-living or shared housing situations that many people living in the city find as a more affordable way to live in an urban environment. And then way off on the fringe, you also have shared income communities or commune communities, which do share the vast majority of their income and material possessions and job and livelihood. That's a very, very connected way of living.
Do you speak as though that's kind of rare? Is that the case?
Yeah, I think that last one, there's just a handful of them in the US, but some very old and well established, like Twin Oaks community in Virginia, that's about 50 years old. So.
I've spent some time in Israel where they have the kibbutzim, and the kibbutzim, generally those ones that have survived, do have this financial support in them. There's some kind of business that the kibbutz has, and that's one of the things that I took away as one of the most important and exciting things about the model, was that no matter what kind of role you had in the community, what your talents were, there was a way for you to live there and to be supported doing that. And so you could be a business manager, or you could be work in the farm, or you could be doing childcare, or some of the kibbutzim even have professional musicians as part of their community.
Nice.
The kibbutz near to us had an orchestra and kept a composer as one of the jobs in the village.
Awesome. Yeah, it reminded me actually of one of my favorite communities called La Cité Écologique, which has one part of the community is in Quebec, Canada, and another part in New Hampshire in the US. But they have developed complete economic self-sufficiency in the community through their own businesses and enterprises, such that the kids who grow up there, might go off to college, but they want to come back to the community because there's a job and a career for them there. So it's created this beautiful multi-generational community where everyone feels like they can really have right livelihood while living in this eco-village.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And from my experience of communities in Australia, really necessary, I think, because we have a lot of communities that I've seen in Australia where they call it a community, but it essentially the only thing that's in common is that they're living on the same piece of land. Okay. And maybe once a week they might actually get together and have some kind of meal together. But they spend most of their time working in jobs outside of the community and traveling quite a long distance to these jobs. So they just don't have time to meet each other and to have anything really to do with each other. So it struck me that if a community is really going to be interactive, then it needs to have some kind of income to create this foundation.
Yeah, to build in elements of what we call community glue.
Community glue.
There's a variety of ways to do it, but how sticky can you make your community?
Give me some examples of community glue.
Well, one, like you mentioned, is this idea of shared meals. I
Mm,
think that's a really common way for communities to build in connection inherently.
mm,
If you share potluck meals together, or even something more organized where people in the community rotate, taking turns cooking dinner a few nights of the week or all nights of the week.
mm,
I've been part of communities where lunch and dinner every day is shared and breakfast is independent. But so that's one way. I think another way that communities build in this glue element, especially communities with families, is
mm,
through childcare and education for the children.
mm,
I mean, kids just are naturally, they got this social connection thing and they're built into them,
mm,
much more so, I think, than adults do sometimes. So the more that you can foster ways for kids to be able to play with each other and maybe even go to school in the community, that's a
mm.
really neat way to do it. Yeah, yeah.
One
But
of the
there's,
things that I've noticed is the actual structures of how the houses relate to each other, the relationship between the houses. So if you go to an ordinary conventional street, all of the houses face the street. Um, and so you walk outside your house, you go to the cars. But I've stayed in a few different places and I've seen a few places that have the houses facing their front doors face inwards towards each other. And inside there is a garden, or there is a building that people can share, or there is a playground, or there is something in the middle that people go to. And then they open their doors and they're already in community. They're already talking to each other. And
Mhm.
I've noticed that it reduces a lot the need for other kinds of glue, because it's like you're already there. You're already meeting people. So that's one thing that I've really noticed.
Yeah, lovely. Yes. And one thing worth mentioning is I don't think I'm supporting, or my organization is supporting, everyone upping and moving to communities. There's a
Mm.
lot that can be done to create community where you are.
Uh-huh.
And one of them is like taking down the fences in your backyard and really getting to know the person on the other side and sharing more common space.
That that's an interesting one, because it seems so obvious and easy, and yet somehow it's not. Somehow there's a lot of resistance to that. I think the community dinners seem to be a lot easier to starting point than the taking the fences down.
Yes, one step at a time.
One step. I have met a street in Perth, Western Australia,
Mm.
which had a couple of people who really moved towards this direction of a community street, and they were doing really well. They all knew each other. They all came to dinners once a week together, and then they started organizing projects. And they had like a festival once a year that they organized, and the whole of the suburb came to visit them in their street because they were the coolest street, you know. And so some really good things just came out of trying to build community where you are.
Yes, I think in the US, the best example I know of this is in Portland, Oregon,
Mm,
with the Village Building Convergence.
mhm,
I don't know if you've seen the photos. What they do once a year is they have this festival essentially in the suburbs, and they take city intersections and paint these gorgeous murals on the intersection. And so cars slow down and they create these little nooks on the street corners, maybe a little tea house or a free book library or seed bank,
mhm,
something to
mhm,
bring more place and intentionality back into these environments that, yeah, have really, for a variety of reasons, lost that community element.
mhm, mhm. The thing of having dinners together is really quite important, I think,
Mm.
and a good starting point. I've heard a lot of community development people that I've spoken to have talked about the difficulty of starting and getting people really motivated to create community and to meet each other, um, and to do things together. It's not easy to launch, but when they've spoken about their success and how they managed to get people together, it was always around food. It was
Yes.
like eventually we had a barbecue and everybody came, and this is where it started. It somehow it was like the food was the starting point of the whole project.
Sweet.
Mm.
Yummy.
We used to, my family ran a little suburban micro community in our house. So we had a lot of people staying with us, and we had for some years a household of quite a connected community, very small, there's not much that can fit in a house, but and then we had even 2 or 3 houses. And now we're working on trying to launch a community in a farm. It's just early days on that, but we have some experience with this. And one of the things we did very strongly was the shared meals. We had everybody eating meals together at least once, and preferably twice a day, and then once a week would have a big party with inviting all our friends and having a big meal and potluck dinner and music, songs, play games. And this was really the glue that we felt was very important. And my sense of it is that a lot of it's to do with building traditions. So people would come and say, what are the rules? And we'd say, we don't have many rules, and no alcohol, but traditions, we have a lot. It's like things that we do that kind of make things work. And you're not going to whip people into shape and make them do these things, because they're not rules, but they're fun, and people choose to do them because I think that's maybe what we're talking about.
I think one of the distinguishing characteristics of communities is this ability to shape the culture of the community and the rules or no rules, the governance model, the decision-making method. Really, communities are kind of like self-sovereign in that sense. So it's very empowering for people to be part of communities. You grow up going through life and the school makes the rules or your job sets the rules, but in community, it's really this opportunity to create a shared culture that is unique to that group and that place.
A lot of people seem to be kind of scared of community, though. They talk about how it's a good idea, but they go, I'm not sure I could live in community. I think I would be, I need my privacy. I need to be able to do things for myself. Do you come across that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that community is the right thing for everyone. And I think there's such a wide variety in the ways that you can do community or bring more community into your life. But yeah, I totally get some people are more introverted or they want more privacy. One of the things I like at the community where I live is everyone has their own home and their own kitchen. This feels good for me to be able to go into my own space and kind of get away. But then if I want to engage, it's always right outside the front door. So I like that idea of having a privacy spectrum. It's not like you have to go all into people interaction 100% of the time. You can have this variety of what you need for yourself. So I do think, though, that people can find the level of community and the type of community that works for them. It just might be harder to find, or might be different.
I like the idea of a privacy spectrum. I'm personally quite extreme in my extroversion, and I want to be in the center where everything is happening all the time. And I know that some people are quite the opposite. One stage we had somebody staying with us who told me he could not talk to someone for a week, and he would eventually, at the end of a week, he would go, yeah, I think I should come and have a conversation. And he'd come to a meal and a conversation, and then he'd go away for another week and stay in the garden, just building things and looking after things in the garden. He was amazing in our garden. He worked in our garden for 6 months to a year, right through the heat of the summer. working so hard in the garden. You know, had a full-time job as well, and would come home and work in the garden. And we never got him to cook
Okay.
because he was so busy doing wonderful things in the garden that we wouldn't dream of asking him to do anything else.
Yeah.
And that's leads me to another question, which is like, what do you see about the ways that people organize the work in communities?
Well, in most communities, it is organized in some fashion. I think what is typical is that residents have kind of like, whether it's explicit or implicit, a certain number of hours that they are meant to pitch in and help out with the gardens or cooking or whatever it is. And in some communities, this is quite organized. I'm thinking of a senior co-housing community where they are in a big building together, but they do all of the maintenance, except for the really technical or difficult things, all of the cleaning of the building, caring for the building. Everyone in the community has a job to do to care for their space. Yeah, so that's one way of doing it. And then maybe more involved would be the model where everyone actually has like a job to do, and maybe even a paid job within the community. Although I think for most groups, it's more casual. It's more about a felt sense for contribution and sharing, reciprocity, because people want to feel like they're contributing in a good way. And it doesn't mean everyone contributes in the same way, but yeah, I think that's part of wanting to live in the community, is wanting to share. So did that answer your question?
Yeah. So there's this. It's interesting to me that you do find mostly people contributing in different ways, in their own unique way, as you've just discussed. This is totally my experience of what works. But when I look at the share houses around me and the places where I see people kind of experimenting with community who are not very familiar with it, it's very common for them to talk about everybody having a roster and everybody doing exactly the same things. Everybody taking a turn cooking, everybody taking a turn cleaning, kind of making a very regimented system that makes it the same for everybody in some way. And I always felt that wasn't quite right. Then it worked better to allow people to contribute in different ways. And it's interesting that you're saying that this is commonly the way it's done. So obviously people do find
Yeah.
that.
I think in terms of the communities I have visited, what is common is to set a shared criteria for number of hours contributed, or like every Sunday is our work party. And so everyone comes and helps out for 4 hours on Sundays. So that the setting a standard time contribution I've seen. And in some cases also, like what you're describing, the roles are rotated and shared. Yeah, I don't think one way is necessarily better than the other. It really is up to what works for that group of people. Maybe if everyone has 9 to 5 jobs and they really just need to know what they're doing on what day so they can fit it in with their other work, then that might be a good system for them to have it be more regimented.
Yeah, right. Why do you think community is important?
Why is community important? I'm trying to think of what I haven't said thus far. Community is important because it can bring a lot more joy and connection and security, support into one's life. And I think in a bigger context, communities serve as the building block for wider societal change, to get away from the notion that it's one person, the charismatic leader, who will bring about real systemic change. No, it's people coming together in small configurations, relearning how to be a community. Like that alone is such an important skill set that we've lost. So reviving this as a way of life, and then connecting with other groups of people who are doing similar things in their own environment, their own contexts, creating bridges amongst these communities. This is how we bring about grassroots systemic change that's not government-led or led from the top down, but is really community-led. So I think it's important on just that personal level. Like for me personally, I enjoy living in community. It's not always easy, but it's something, it feels very worthwhile for me. And I also think that it's a very practical way that we can go about creating small scale, but build the momentum towards larger and larger change. And I sometimes think that communities are microcosms for all the problems in the wider world. So not to think that you join a community and then everything's all dandy, but actually the problems that happen in the bigger world show up in community. But the difference in community is that we're committed to seeing it through and coming together and learning from these challenges and bridging differences, embracing tensions. So it's an incredible opportunity to kind of work out in a smaller scale the problems of the bigger world, all of the polarization and conflict. We get to address that in community in a much more direct and tangible way.
I've heard it said that there are particular skills that we need to learn to live in community. And these are kind of skills that we're not taught in school. The skills that are in some cases the opposite of what you're taught in school. I find it very natural to do a lot of the kind of sharing communal approach to things, and I do a lot of conflict resolution is something I do for fun. So conflicts in the community don't scare me. But I imagine that if you don't have these skills, that you come into a community and you see these conflicts and these issues and you have no idea how to handle it. You've never not been taught. It could be a really, really difficult new thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, communication and collaboration, I think, are two of the biggest skills, because we live in a society that teaches us about competition and independence. And so when we come into a community, it's really humbling. I mean, gosh, learning about social process, nonviolent communication, how to work together in a non-competitive way, how to, these are all big shifts. And you're right, most of us didn't grow up with some of these skills. So it's, a friend of mine says that living in community is the greatest personal growth experience you can ever have, because you learn so much about yourself and be willing to change and adapt. And just being in a community context, it's like you have these mirrors all around you showing you parts of yourself, and you got to work with that. And so there's the self skills as well as the interpersonal skills.
I have a friend who says that the problem with the world is that hierarchy. Okay, hierarchy is okay. You have someone who tells somebody else what to do. There might be problems with it, but we can manage it. But when the hierarchy goes inside your own head and you've got one part of yourself telling the other part what to do, then you've really got problems. And that this is how most of us are living. That we force ourselves into different actions, and we try to be something and try to do something. And he says the cure is to laugh at yourself, to listen to that part of you that's bossing the rest of you around and go, yeah, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to listen to you. Maybe I don't care. I'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But the point that he gets to, and he's talking about, is that once you get to this point where you're not forcing yourself to do something, where you're kind of like being a bit more natural, then what is it that people naturally want to do? They don't control each other. They don't try to force things on each other because they realize they're not even forcing things on themselves. So how can they control somebody else? But naturally what they'd want to do is to cooperate because it's fun. And so the concept of, if we can learn to be really truly ourselves, then it becomes very easy to cooperate. But if we're kind of coming from a place of in ourselves where we're not cooperating clearly with ourselves, we're not in harmony inside, then this becomes a big challenge, something that we need to learn and grow into.
Yeah, I think cooperation is intrinsic to all species. In Darwin's Origin of Species, there's this misnomer that it's all about competition, survival of the fittest. But I've heard that, I haven't fact checked this, but the word cooperation is found many more times in that book than the word competition. And actually, the way that species get on with surviving is by working together within their own species and across species. There's many more examples of this kind of collaboration, cooperation in the natural world. And so I think for us as humans, we've gotten into this fallacy that to get on top, you got to push other people down. And that's not actually inherent to how we have evolved. So it's a part of us, but it's not the whole story.
This concept of survival of the fittest is very interesting. At the time, the way the word was used, fittest, meant like fitting in the most. It didn't mean like I can run the fastest. It means I fit in. Which creature fits into the ecology the most? And so the one that survives is the one that fits in, that cooperates, that collaborates with all of the other things that are going on in that ecosystem. So by that basis, if we don't change, we're doomed because we're not fitting in at all.
Yeah.
It's when we fit in is when we will survive, and the creatures that survive are the ones that fit in.
I hadn't heard that before. Nice.
Yeah. So it's quite clear. The fittest is not about most competitive. It's about most fitting.
Most fitting.
Yeah. So what systemic changes do you think the world needs at the moment?
There's so many.
Give me top three.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think as we've been focusing on this bit about community is really essential. Especially right now, as an American, listening to the news every morning about just how far apart we are. And it's okay to have differences of opinions, but to this skill of communication and collaboration, coming together to get over the differences and focus on what does bring us together, and bringing in those elements of community glue so that we can foster more resilient communities to face what's coming our way. Because I'm sure there's going to be more challenges coming our way with climate disasters and political, social upheaval. So yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Learning, relearning how to be community is essential. I know we haven't talked about it so much, but I do think our economic systems that really drive a lot of the decisions that we make need to change for there to be further systemic change. Moving beyond capitalism, I think, is essential. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think that we can't continue in the mythology that we can just use more and more resources and grow infinitely. We live on a finite planet. So we need to find ways of exchanging materials and goods and bring it into something that is actually sustainable for our planet and is more fair, just. Yeah. And I guess, again, I can only really speak to what's happening in the United States in terms of racial and social injustice and inequity. I do know that it does play out on a bigger global scale with this injustice between the global north and the global south, but really creating systems of governance and social systems that are inclusive to people of all walks of life and all backgrounds and all skin tones, where these people have a voice. So yeah, somehow coming into a truly more equitable society is probably my third thing on that list. So we have community,
Economy and equity.
Economy and justice, I would say.
Justice. Okay, lovely. Community we talked about a lot. Economy. Do you think that community could carry over into economy? That we could affect economy through community?
Certainly, more a local economy. Having maybe local currencies or time banks, or just going away from the money at all and entering into more of a gift economy reality that I think becomes very practical in a smaller community scale, where you don't need to exchange money for everything. You can barter, you can trade, you can gift. So I think those are all like solutions that are ways we can counter or go beyond capitalism in a community.
And what about justice? Do you think the community has some impact to play on that as well?
Yeah, well, I can say for intentional communities, it is true, again, especially in the United States, a lot of them are majority white and very privileged. It's a very privileged thing to be able to leave behind whatever life you had before and go and join an intentional community. And I think that in my own organization, we're doing a lot of work to try to address this and create communities that are more diverse in terms of socioeconomic background, race, ethnicity. And again, it's one of those places where we can do that hard work and experiment with creating truly inclusive societies within the microcosm of a community.
One of the difficulties, I imagine, is culture. I've seen this, like I'm thinking particularly in Israel. There are different races in Israel, but religions and cultures too. And they don't even speak the same language in many cases. And so there are some cases where they're putting together communities that are crossing those cultural and religious and racial boundaries. But I imagine it must be very difficult because you're having to create some new culture that is completely different to what you've had before. You're not just able to settle into it the way the things that you're familiar with.
Yeah, building a new culture. I think that transcends everything that we're talking about. Yeah. Creating something new. And I also want to say, just because I know I was just touting diverse communities, but I also think it is completely valid and important that BIPOC communities or communities that have been historically marginalized can feel empowered to create communities of their own. I'm thinking of a really wonderful example in Alabama. I'm going to mispronounce the community's name, but essentially a Indigenous tribe, a Native American tribe that was forcibly removed from their ancestral homelands have come back to Alabama and are creating a community just for their people to preserve and try to preserve as best they can their language and their integrity as a tribe, as a community. And that is super valid, and I think we should do all we can to support them in those efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, this is very much about culture again, the development of culture. We talk about preserving culture, but as someone once told me, you can't preserve culture. That means putting it in a jar and pickling it. You have to develop culture, grow culture, do something that allows it to live. And so then it lives and it changes, but it stays strong. I've seen a couple of interesting examples of that recently. In Adelaide, Australia, one of the Aboriginal communities, the native Adelaide region Aboriginal community has resurrected their language, which hasn't been spoken for decades. And there was actually no native speakers, like no one knew the language. Everyone had forgotten the language. And they had some anthropologists who had collected data on this language, and they used it to reconstruct the language, extended it, and got in new words that they invented to make it usable for modern things. And they've started speaking it, and they're really proud of having this language that they can speak. It's totally not authentic. It's not the way they spoke back then at all. It's just it's a reinvention, a recreation based on some elements that they've been able to find and kind of extending into something else. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's not an authentic preservation of what they spoke 100 years ago. It is what it is now. It is their language. It is their culture that they're expressing through it. And I'm sure there are other examples. I had another one in my head that I've forgotten. That doesn't matter. We don't need it. So tell me about your work more. We've been talking about communities, but your organization, what was the organization called again?
The Foundation for Intentional Community.
Foundation for Intentional Community.
Yes.
And
at ic.org, for those of you who are interested.
FIC.org or
or ic.org.
IC.org. Just IC, intentionalcommunities.org. Keep it short and simple. So you're about connecting people to intentional communities, helping people find a place where they would fit. Is that it? How does it work exactly?
Yeah. So let me back up a little bit. So I've been fortunate to have been involved with multiple organizations who are supporting intentional communities. I served on the board of the Global Ecovillage Network for a number of years, for example, and I was on the board of FIC for a number of years, and then switched into a staff position to really support our branding and communications, and now our online event programming and such. So we have this directory. You can really see a map and search this directory with, I think now it's close to 2,000 listings of communities who have joined and post information about themselves. So you can really do a pretty detailed search. I'm looking for a community in this area that has this focus, and there you go. You can get connected that way. We also offer events.
This is FIC now. This is
ic.org.
ic.org on that in that website. There's that. Okay.
Yes. We also have events that we do every week, kind of some similar to what we're doing now, like interviews, some panel discussions, networking events. And I'm so excited. We just launched this past week online courses for people who want to find, join, or start intentional community. So we have like a range of topics to support people in this path. As well as books, and you can also place classified ads if you have land in a community for sale or a house for sale, something like that. So that's kind of the things that we're up to.
And this is for the whole world or just for USA?
The whole world. Yeah.
Lovely.
We do have most of our communities and most of our audience, I would say, is in the United States, but definitely global. And then myself personally, I do one-on-one coaching. I call it community matchmaking for people who are wanting to join an existing community. I can help connect them to what community might be a good fit for them. And that's work I do through my own business and my website, just cynthiatina.com. Yeah. And I also do a little consulting for communities who are starting and growing as well.
Tell me about that.
Well, that is mostly in the realm of, again, kind of marketing, branding, website design. So I'm a big supporter in helping these beautiful, gorgeous communities come online so that people can more easily see them and be attracted to them and want to join. So I'm currently doing this work with Ithaca Ecovillage, which is the largest ecovillage in the United States in Ithaca, New York.
Yeah. I kind of think I've heard the name, but probably not in the same context. It's like a reference to something mythical, isn't it?
Yeah, Ithaca. Yes.
It's the one who flew near the sun, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It's the name of the city in New York. So that's the namesake of this eco-village.
Is it a very hot place? No.
It's kind of similar. It's a little further south from where I am. I'm looking outside of all the snow. But no, it's can get chilly in the winter, but it's a lovely place.
Yes, we had snow here in Portugal, which was a special experience. You do get snow in the mountains, but in the valley here where we are, we actually had snow, and that was very exciting for everybody.
Well, you're in Portugal. I was thinking must be in Australia this whole time.
Well, I come from Australia, and I moved to Portugal only a year ago. And of course, most of that year has been COVID-19.
Yeah.
So, you don't actually get to see the place under that situation.
Yeah.
So I have managed to learn a bit of the language, but it's been quite crippling not being able to really interact as much as you would normally.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Challenging times.
Okay, so if people want to get in touch with you, they can look at ic.org and Cynthia Tina what was it?
.com.
CynthiaTina.com, and you'll help them with finding communities that they will love, and also helping the communities to grow in some way. Is it mostly startup communities that you work with, like the beginning phases, or is it
a variety?
And it is just variety, just wherever they need it.
Yeah.
And they can also go to ic.org and use the resources that are there.
Yeah, a lot of resources.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
I hope we
Thank you
can
for this
continue to
conversation.
discuss and to productive partnerships and more communities in all areas of life in the future.
Yes, and thank you for your work with the Systems Change Alliance. It's wonderful you're doing these podcasts and helping to bring about a shift.